you are going to wreck trade here. £1 to £3 billion of extra cost to get food into this country from Europe. So the people who will really suffer are the smaller retailers like restaurants and delicatessens. And if they do survive, you, the consumer, are going to have to pay extra money for all of the charges that the government are imposing from today.
After more than 3 years of delays, the government have brought in post-Brexit border checks on goods travelling through Dover. Importers of food from the EU into Britain say the new checks could increase their costs by up to 60%. Now, if you're a government committed to reducing inflation, this might be some cause for concern. They're also worried about the political ramifications of long queues at the border. Businesses are looking down the barrel of combustion. So, what's going on?
Having left the EU, we do need border controls, but what is being proposed won't be controlled. It will be chaos. Now, the EU brought in checks in 2021, but this government has delayed doing that 5 times. And in that time, they could have negotiated an SPS deal to avoid the mess that is about to happen. Instead, from Wednesday, for the first time, 2.7 million lorries will need to be stopped at Dover so their contents can be checked, and another 4 million will require a health certificate for the animal products they carry. On top of this, 5 million of them will have to pay a common user charge for the privilege of importing goods deemed medium or high risk, whether or not they're inspected. The costs to business, which we know will be passed on to consumers, are horrendous and chaotic, these charges only being confirmed on the 18th of April. Now, the government has admitted that this will cause inflation, but they claim it's only 300 million over 0.2% over 3 years. Independent analysis shows it will be 10 times that, or £8 a month on the average food shop.
She deliberately picked on the highest figure that is available. For low-risk goods, there is a £10 charge for those products, capped at a maximum of 5 products. So the maximum you can have on a low-risk product a lorry load would be £50. Now, she is right in that we have calculated that over 3 years we think that will lead to about 0.2% on food inflation.
The government have put that cost at about £300 million. So how have they got that so wildly wrong?
It's a really good question. To me, it looks like a work of fiction. They've published 2 figures, 330 million. I have asked the government to tell us what their calculations are, how they come to that figure. They have declined to give me those on 2 occasions. We estimate conservatively 1 billion. Other reports say 3 billion. And I think it's probably somewhere in between those 2 figures. But the other figure that they've released is that food inflation will only go up by 0.2%. And this is where, you have to really look at the facts before you come to a conclusion on what is released as a fact, because 0.2% inflation, we believe, has been calculated on the £330 million you stated, but also on the entire turnover of food purchasing in this country, which is a huge, huge figure. Now, if you just put that percentage figure on just food coming over from Europe, that's not 0.2%, that's more like 20%. So in terms of the food you enjoy coming from Europe, you could, not tomorrow, but in the next few weeks, you could be looking at 20% food inflation on some of that food coming from Europe. And let's not forget, this isn't just nice to have food. This is essential food. Something like 40% of our beef comes from Europe. Pork is around about 30%, chicken, 40%. So we're looking at, really big percentages of food. We can't feed ourselves in this country. I mean, that's a crying shame, but actually productivity in this country is diving because of climate change. So we are more reliant on food from Europe than we've ever been. And yet the government decide that this is a good time to actually impose lots and lots of charges in order to make that food more expensive. Now, all of this is brought about by Brexit. It's the last consequence of Brexit. And we all have to agree that we should have secure borders in terms of food imports. Secure and safe food is absolutely essential to us as a nation. But at the same time, do the government have to really load all of these costs on to the supply chain, to the producer, to the retailer, to the consumer? I would argue they do not. And it's beginning to look a little bit like almost like a stealth tax on UK businesses.
Do you imagine it will turn suppliers off from wanting to travel into the UK?
It already has.
I mean, we've been very uncertain all along as to how much it's going to cost and how many delays there could be. And it comes for us at the height of the season. So uncertainty is not good for business, but you know, the government want to bring it in and we have to comply. And we're trying to find the best way to do that without losing too much business or costing too much. You know, for the amount of lorries we bring in, it could cost us hundreds of thousands of pounds. They only announced it 3 weeks ago, how much it's going to cost at Sevington. And at Harwich, for example, where quite a lot of material comes in, it's a privately run company and the costs are variable. So we won't know actually how much it's cost us until the actual day of inspection. For example, we buy quite a lot of plant material from Belgium and we use a haulier there. And they're saying to us that their drivers are pretty reluctant to bring the loads to the UK because they have to wait potentially for a whole night to get inspected. They had one trial load came through earlier this week and it took 3.5 hours to unload and check, and then the driver had to reload it because they couldn't reload it properly. So there's potential for problems with the drivers. There's also potential problems for the haulage companies having to issue extra bills to us, for example, if they're kept waiting for a long time.
We're so good now in the industry at getting fresh food over to the UK very quickly that actually we could probably unload fresh fish from a French trawler on French soil at 6 a.m, and that will be on UK soil 3.5 hours later. Wow. That will be in Billingsgate Market 4.5 hours later. We are that quick now at making sure that food is transported, chilled, frozen, and it gets to market really quickly. The new rules say the computer system says that you must give 24 hours notice once you've loaded that product onto your lorry. How on earth do you give 24 hours notice on fresh fish that actually by the time it reaches UK soil will be going off? Even in a chilled environment, it will be deteriorating.
Wait, hang on, can you just explain that? Sorry, just explain that to me quickly. So there needs to be 24 hours notice for the product that you're about to transport.
Correct. So at the moment, well, until today, what we were able to do is pick up fresh cheese, fresh products, fresh fish in Europe. And because our supply chain is so sophisticated, we could have that on a lorry, on a ferry going to Dover within 3.5 hours. We can land it on UK soil in 3.5 hours. But the new computer system in these regulations states that you must give 24 hours notice. It's called 24-hour derogation. We have been hammering away at this with government saying, you are going to wreck trade here. You're going to put off producers, but you're also going to put off the haulage companies that cannot afford, with the products they're carrying, cannot afford to sit in Calais for 18 hours until they've hit that 24-hour mark, because at the moment they're doing it in 3.5 hours. And that's good for you. It's good for me because I get fresh food. You get fresh food. But I don't want to eat a fish that's been sitting in the back of a lorry for 24 hours before it actually gets to a fish market.
You know, for a lot of products, you know, the shelf life is everything. And actually by losing a day or two of shelf life, it can massively sort of devalue the product. So actually, yeah, that's a massive concern. Before Brexit, we were part of the single market, so we're part of the European Union. And each member state would make sure that they are doing the controls themselves and would monitor it to make sure that they're compliant with all the EU regulations, so that when the goods are moving through, that they were all working to the same standards. We want to work towards a common veterinary agreement, so that in these sort of areas of veterinary controls and biosecurity, we would sort of agree to work within the same controls, as to be in the same sort of legal limits as the EU. Therefore you're able to keep moving the trades, and it would actually get rid of all the need for this certification checks at BCPs. It would also help with the sort of difficulties we're having with Northern Ireland, and it would sort of help with that movement of trade, because one of the issues that we've got with this these new requirements is actually it's a lot of additional costs and bureaucracy to businesses.
There are all manner of issues within this system that clearly show that government have not consulted with the industry. They're not working with the industry models that already exist and have done for 20, 30 years, but at the same time are imposing these sort of bureaucratic systems and costs onto it. So you and I will go shopping tomorrow and we'll find what we want to find, but that may not be the case in weeks and months ahead as we move this system forward, unless DEFRA and the port authorities are willing to talk properly with the industry so that we can carry on supplying food to the UK consumer.